Good morning, Year 7, and welcome to Lesson 2 on what does the Queen actually do. Thank you very much to all of you that watched the video last week and completed the work. There's a good amount of submissions on Show My Homework, so please keep them coming. The most important part of that work is that paragraph you wrote at the end, so please make sure that if you haven't submitted it, you are submitting it. As teachers will give you feedback and they will be keeping tabs on how you are writing and what you are writing for that last question. Before we start, please, if you don't have a pen or some paper, which you need for this session, pause the video and go and get some now. Get yourself ready, get yourself a drink if you need to, and come back and we'll be ready to start. So, what does the Queen actually do? Over the next couple of lessons, we are going to be looking at other British monarchs and comparing them to the Queen that we did last week, our current Queen. The reason why we're doing that is because we're looking at the power of the kings and queens over our history, and we're looking at how the Queen has come to the state that she's in now. Why does she have the power that she has now? How does that compare to previous kings and queens that have come? So, last lesson, I set you a list of keywords to go and find me the definitions for. So that's where we're going to start. I have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 keywords on my screen or on your screen, and I'd like you to write definitions for as many of them as you can. See if you can do it without using your notes from last lesson. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, so pause the video for 2 minutes and go and do as many as you can. Okay, so let's look at some of these keywords. So these 6 keywords are really important. The reason we give you keywords is because we want you to be acting and talking and writing like historians. And historians use keywords to show that they have a good understanding of what they are talking about. It also means that you don't have to, talk more to describe something when it's actually got a term, it's got a word that fits a better description. So let's start with divine right of kings. Now hopefully a lot of you will know this already, but the divine right of kings is the belief that a king is chosen by God to rule, giving them power over their people. So king's power is increased because people think that God has put them on earth to be king. So it's mainly aimed at people who are very religious, and as we know, people were a lot more religious in our history, so that would have given the king a lot more power. The word succession is the action of inheriting a title. So a succession is the person who comes after the king, who's the king passing his power on to. The word monarchy is a country governed by a ruler who usually inherits authority. So in England we have a monarchy, we have a queen that is inherited the throne from her father. But in places like America, they have an elected official who is in position for 4 to 8 years, and then we move on to the next one. There's no inheritance of titles in America, so the president's son will never become the president unless he goes through the process of applying to become president and winning his own election based on his own merit. Sovereign is a nation's ruler, usually by hereditary right. Okay, so the right of what's in their blood, they have the blood right to be the next king or queen. And today, we use the word sovereign. The Queen is the sovereign of a number of countries, including places like Canada, but she doesn't have actually any powers there. She's kind of the honorary sovereign in that country. The word commoner is a person who holds no titles, so they are the everyday person. They are the subjects of the king or the queen. So today we are subjects of Queen Elizabeth II. We probably wouldn't describe ourselves as commoners anymore, but we do not hold titles. The word coronation is the ceremony of installing a new monarch. So although we haven't had a new monarch for a long time, when we do have our new monarch, which will be in your lifetime, there will be a large event where a new king or queen, it will be a king in your lifetime. The new king will be sworn into office. He will take an oath. He will have a crown. He will have a scepter and an orb, and he will officially become the new monarch. So let's have a look at what we're doing today. So today we're looking at this man, and this is Alfred the Great. And Alfred the Great was the King of England in the 9th century. Okay, so 9th century means the 800s, which is a very early. This is this is over 1,000 years into our past, and King Alfred the Great is considered to be one of the first English kings, and we'll describe why that is a bit later. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at who he was, how he came into power, what he controlled, what powers he had, and how he is remembered today. Now, obviously, straight away, he's remembered as the Great, and that's the nickname that is associated with him. But the term the Great is actually reserved for only two kings. There are only two English kings ever who have held the title the Great, and that's Alfred the Great and Canute the Great, who follows him about 100 years after. So, what I want you to think about is, how would someone gain the title the Great? Pause the video here, and for 1 minute I want you to write down as many different ideas as you can think of why someone might get the title the Great. So Alfred becomes Alfred the Great, and hopefully we've all got the idea that he must have done something significant in his reign. He must have done something that was great enough to gain that nickname, and the answer is he did do something pretty great, and today is about finding out what he did. So for your second task, I'd like you to pause this video. I'd like you to open a new tab and watch the video in the description box, and I want you to make notes about Alfred's life. So head off to that video and I'll join you back here in a minute. Okay, so an interesting kind of overview of Alfred's life. There's lots going on there, and what you've picked up from the video is Alfred becomes Alfred the Great mainly because his interaction with the Vikings. And the Vikings are these fierce warriors from across the North Sea that attack Britain and try and take over it. So, using what we've just done, using his title, The Great, using that video we just watched, I'd like you to write 3 sentences right now about why Alfred was important. Pause the video there for 2 minutes, and I will see you when you're done with that task. So, Alfred. To learn about why Alfred is so great, it's important to learn about what England was like before Alfred. So England was not England. There was no such thing as being English. The island, as we can see in this map, was split up into lots of different Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. We've got places like Mercia, Northumbria, East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex, Wessex. These are all individual kingdoms controlled by their own king. Now, today they look a little like the counties, and we obviously have more counties today, and those counties are based on this very early construction of Britain. But we've got to remember that each one of these has its own king, and it's not just a council. So each one of these kingdoms has its own king. It might have its own religion, its own language. They speak a completely different language to the country next to them. They'll have their own money. Different kingdoms might be more rich than others, and they'll also have different laws, and there are lots of other things that they have that are different. So it's important to note that before Alfred, England was divided, and if England is divided, it means these counties won't come to each other's aid and won't come to support each other, and that means England is very weak. And that was soon realised by the arrival of the Vikings, led by the fierce warrior Guthrum. And he was the leader of the Great Heathen Army. They're called the Great Heathen Army because they were seen as against Christianity, and that's how they got their name. They invaded from the east, and they took control of lots of land. They were unstoppable. They stormed through Northumbria, into Mercia, East Anglia, Essex. They took all of these counties until they arrived here in Wessex. And Wessex is the kingdom of Alfred. So we're thinking about why Alfred was so important when all these other kingdoms, were taken over by the Vikings. So, two things to do. The first one is I'd like you to complete the sentence before Alfred, England was, and tell me what England was like, how it was separated into the different kingdoms, and tell me some of the differences between the two kingdoms. And then I'd like you to tell me why Alfred earned the title the Great. Okay, so think about how he's the last man, the last kingdom standing up against the Vikings, and I just want you to write one sentence about how he might earn the title the Great. Pause the video there for 3 minutes and come back to me when you're done. So, let's have a look at how Alfred earns that title. What does he do to become great? So over the next 2 slides, all I want you to do is make a list of why you think Alfred was so great. So, becoming great. Alfred became king in AD 871. His elder brothers had each been king in turn before him, and he had been fighting the Vikings all his life. Alfred went on fighting the Vikings when all seemed hopeless. He joined with other Saxon tribes for the first time against the Vikings. So he inherits the throne from his father and brothers. He then continues to fight the Vikings even though it was hopeless, so he never gave up fighting the Vikings. He then joins with other Saxon tribes to combat the Vikings, and it's that kind of brings people together, and it stops England from being so weak. Finally, he won an important battle at Edington in Wiltshire in AD 878. He defeated Guthrum and his Viking army. So he was the English king that stopped the Viking army. He stopped the Viking army and ended the threat of the Vikings. So keep adding to your list of why Alfred was so great for me. Okay, so what happened next? After that, some Vikings agreed to live in peace, though fighting still went on. So he brought peace to England. They also made an agreement by which England was divided into 2 zones. The south and west were Saxon law, where Saxon law would apply, and the north and east where Danish law ruled. This second territory became known as Danelaw. So Alfred ended the war with the Vikings, and he separated England into 2 parts. One called England, so for the first time it's now referred to as England or the English kingdom. And then we've got the kingdom of Danelaw, which is controlled by the Vikings. So all of these people that used to live in the different kingdoms now live in one kingdom, and the only king of that kingdom is King Alfred. So Alfred has become the King of England, and for the first time, which is very important. But he's also managed to gain peace with the Vikings, and they can live together without being attacked. So what power did Alfred actually have? Let's have a look at what Alfred did when he came into power. So Alfred was advised by a council of nobles and church leaders. The council were called the Witan. The Witan could also choose the next king. So Alfred was not necessarily in charge of who became the next king of England, but it would most likely be his son. There were council nobles and church leaders because Alfred was Christian. So he has religion, but he also has a group of people surrounding him that help him make decisions. Think about how that's similar to Queen Elizabeth. Alfred made the laws. So Alfred was in charge of making all laws in the country. No one else made laws except for him. He had books translated from Latin into English and translated some himself. He told monks to begin writing the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. So he really wanted education. He wanted books. He wanted people to become educated. He built warships to guard the coast from Viking raiders. He built forts and walled towns known as burhs. So he put a lot of things in place to stop any future Viking threats. He split the Fyrd, which is the part-time army, into 2 parts. While half the men were at home on their farms, the rest were ready to fight the Vikings. So he had an army ready to go at all times. Instead of having one large army, he split them in two, and half were sent to continue to do their day jobs in the fields, and the other half would be ready to fight if they needed to. As king, he saw himself as responsible for his subjects, including their religious welfare, so he wanted to make sure that everyone was Christian. And Alfred believed that God had entrusted him with the spiritual as well as physical welfare of his people. So Alfred believed that God had put him where he is. He believed in the divine right of kings, and he believed that every decision he was making was one for his people. So that's Alfred's power. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to write down 3 examples of Alfred's power. So pause the video there for 2 minutes and write down 3 examples of what Alfred did with his power. Okay, so really well done. We're now on to our final task. So we're looking at why was Alfred so important. It's important to note that by the end of Alfred's reign, his coins referred to him as the King of the English. So he is considered the first English king, the first man to unite the people, the different kingdoms in England against the Vikings and together with Christianity. He fought the Vikings and then made peace so that English and Vikings settled down to live together. So he stopped the Viking army from taking over the whole of England. He encouraged people to learn, and he tried to govern well and fairly. He was in charge of recruiting and leading the army, so he was in full control of the army. He made all the laws for the people under his control. And Alfred united the Anglo-Saxons and is regarded as the first real king of England. So lots of reasons to suggest that Alfred is important. So your task, write a paragraph on why you think Alfred the Great was important. Use information from above to help you. So remember, point, example, explain. I think Alfred the Great was important because, I know this because, and this is important because. So I want you to pause the video and I want you to work on this for about 10 minutes. So 10 minutes. Remember, once you've written one paragraph, you can write another paragraph, a second paragraph about why he was important. And you can then compare the reasons and say which reason is the most important. So I'll see you in 10 minutes time. Okay, thank you very much for making it to the end of the lesson. Please make sure you submit me, Mr. Drew and Miss Slater, your work. Okay, it's important that we receive that work so we can give you some good feedback. In terms of getting ready for next lesson, hopefully this one is an interesting one for you. I'd like you to follow the link in the description. I'd like you to watch the Horrible Histories special on Alfred the Great. It's about 25 minutes long. It's a really interesting video, but remember that this is due in on the same day, okay? So you're not meant to spend a whole week doing this. And what I'd like you to do is watch this as soon as possible. Unfortunately, due to whatever issue on BBC iPlayer, this video is only available until Thursday at the end of the day. So please make sure you watch it when you get this homework as soon as possible. So enjoy the Horrible Histories Alfred the Great special. All I want you to do is watch that. Nothing, no other work until next lesson. And I will see you on lesson 3 of what does the Queen actually do. All right, have a good week.